everybody. Welcome to Pale in Comparison. In this podcast, my sister uses her knowledge of the Otherverse to take a look at Wildbow's least appreciated work, and I try not to give away any spoilers. I'm Jenny. Malia convinced me to read Worm.
I'm Malia, and Jenny convinced me to read everything else. This episode, we are covering Bonds, Chapter 1.1. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to issue a spoiler warning. Both Jenny and I have read Pale, and, as you'll learn, the point of this podcast is for me to use my knowledge of Pale to guess what the heck is going on in Pact. Thus, this podcast will be filled with Pale spoilers. If you don't know who killed the Carmine Beast and don't want us to tell you, stop now, read Pale, and come back to this podcast. As for Pact, there will be full spoilers through the chapter that we are covering.
All right, so first, we're just going to do a quick introduction of ourselves, so pretty much why we're doing this podcast. So, again, I'm Jenny, and that's my sister Malia. We basically love Wildbow stories. Like I said, she told me about Worm, and I don't want to say obsessed, but I really, really like the stories. I've read pretty much everything. The only one I haven't gotten all the way through is Twig, because there was a certain part that kind of broke my soul a little bit inside. And so I need to recover from it before I attempt to read Twig again. But I probably will try. I just need some time.
It's been like a year and a half. I mean, I don't even know, but...
You know what? It takes some time, okay? You shut your face. But anyway, I also just kind of want to say, well, I don't know why you'd be listening to this if you haven't read Pact or Pale. If you haven't listened...
if you haven't read Pale.
Or, yeah, I guess so, but... If you haven't read either one of those, you should definitely stop what you're doing and go listen to those, because as we said, there will be spoilers for both of those in this, and they're both fantastic stories. Highly recommend to read them.
Yeah, but as long as you're caught up with me in Pact, we won't spoil past that, unless Jenny lets something slip.
No, I am like a steel trap, okay? I'm not going to let anything slip. And if I do, you're just going to have to edit that out. So we'll try not to make more work for you. Yeah, I basically convinced Malia to read Pact.
Indirectly. Pact was indirect because you thought it'd be too scary for me. And we're going to find out because I'm very afraid of everything. But yeah, you convinced me to read Pact because you convinced me to read Pale.
Yes. And that took a while because she's busy. She's a law student. So she actually has stuff to do. But I actually literally sat her down and read the first chapter of Pale out loud. And instead of getting really irritated with me, it actually kind of hooked her into the story. So,
it worked?
It worked. Let me see. Anything else you want to say about that, Malia?
Yeah, so I guess to set the record, I read Worm, and then I didn't read anything else because I was not involved in the community or anything. I didn't really realize other things were happening. So then Jenny was like, have you heard about Ward? And I was like, what? And eventually I started reading Ward and was slow. And she was harassing me about it. But then she started harassing me about Pale when I wasn't even done with Ward. But I finished Ward and we are current in Pale. Pale is actually still being released right now. But we'll see what happens in terms of that. We're going to stay on top of Pale. I caught up with Pale and then I was like, okay, I really need more. I need more. This book is so freaking good, or this story. And the only option was Pact, which I was kind of afraid of because I heard like Pact is kind of creepy and really intense and I don't do well with scary things at all. But I was like, you know what? I need more. And so I read the first chapter and I called Jenny up and I started talking about it and I was like, this is so hilarious. Like, this person's obviously a practitioner and this person's obviously a familiar and blah, 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 blah. And then it was like, hey, you know what would be funny if like we recorded all this and sent it out into the universe so that other people could like experience reading Pact, which is very confusing, I've heard, with the knowledge of reading or of the Otherverse through Pale, and they could experience that vicariously through me. I just thought it would be fun because that was a very good conversation, and that's kind of why we're doing this. I don't know why Jenny's doing this, but that's why I'm doing this.
I'm humoring you as your older sister, so that's fine. No, I think it'll be fun. But anyway, that is definitely enough about ourselves. Let's dive in here. I'm going to go over basically a chapter summary, and then we'll get into talking about the juicy details here. So, real small summary here. We start off by meeting Blake, our protagonist. We see him arriving at his grandmother's house. There we meet his lovely family, who's arguing over Grandma Rose's belongings since she's facing her imminent demise. Ends up that his cousin Molly gets everything. Rose kicks it, and then he goes back home, and everything's fine. Until 4 months later. And then he has a really intense dream. Is given a warning by a girl in the mirror.
Yeah, you know that everything was fine because that 4 months was a time skip, and Wildbow didn't tell us anything about it. So he was like, too boring.
Yeah, that's true. Everything was actually fine. So I guess just to start off, just because we're starting the story and we know nothing, what do you think Bonds is referring to in the title?
Yeah, so it seems like this story is a lot about family and connections, but it also, so bonds, you know, like family bonding, or as our mom likes to say, family bondage, because she said it wrong once, and then it just became this hilarious, awkward family joke.
That we're now sharing with everyone else, so thank you for that, Malia.
But so bondage, right? Like being constrained, I mean, like there's the sex stuff or whatever, but I think this is more like being constrained, like being tied down, like...
I'm sure no one would have understood the sex stuff if you hadn't have said that. Thanks.
I mean, I don't think the sex stuff comes in
really awkward
to this part of it. Maybe. I guess it could. That's not my prediction.
Okay, let's move on. Oh my gosh, that's not what I want. I regret asking anything.
No, but yeah, so it's being restrained and trapped, but also family.
Like I feel right now. All right. So I'm definitely moving on. So basically we'll start off with Blake pulls up to a house on a hill and basically proceeds to procrastinate as much as he possibly can.
Yeah. What I kind of got from this little bit was that parking is like weirdly a theme. I mean, I guess it makes sense because parking is very stressful and anxiety inducing. One of my biggest problems with going to places that I'm not familiar with is finding parking. Jenny's looking at me like that's dumb, but
no, I think I agree with that. I'm still scarred by you bringing up like sexual bondage in the podcast. Okay. No, parking is stressful. So is bringing up weird shit on a podcast. So thanks a lot, Malia. It was weird enough just bringing up that Mom said bondage for family bonding. And then you had to go ahead and spell it out.
What?
All right.
Okay.
It's fine. I'm going to be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't have to say. Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, I wanted to clarify. I wasn't talking about that. Okay. But parking, right? So the uncle parks in the driveway as this like power move and a dick move so that like no one can get onto the property easily and to be like, I was here first, but also fuck all of you. I guess we're an explicit podcast. And also maybe as some sort of way to like watch people as they approach the house was kind of what I was thinking. But then also like, so he parks in the middle of the driveway and then this like creepy big fence has a whole bunch of no parking signs on it, which is just like rude and seems unnecessary. It seems like not like a desolate town or whatever, but not like a thriving, you know, metropolis where like parking is like a super valuable resource. And so it just seems kind of dicks to be like, don't park on the street outside of my super ugly fence. Meh.
Yeah.
But also just occurred to me, fits in with one of my thoughts later.
All right.
Yeah. But Blake, you know, he shows a little bit of his character. He's like, he's getting around the obstacles. He's getting around the no parking signs. He's getting around the parked car because Blake has a motorcycle, which both probably pisses his family off. Like it's maybe an unconventional choice, but also like allows him to get around the bullshit and get closer to the house than anyone else maybe.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Also talk about some tension building. It says here. We wrote some notes down, so I'm reading Malia's notes for her.
Yeah, well, I mean, the house looks really creepy, but then Blake keeps trying to pretend that the house doesn't look that creepy, but it feels creepy. It's like up on this hill, and there's this really gross fence, and like, ugh, and like, it might be Victorian, we don't really know. But then also, like, there's the people who are watching and like probably talking about Blake, or at least he thinks that they are, and he's obviously procrastinating going inside because he's like, and he keeps saying like, oh, damn me, damn this, damn them. Like, we're not about to have like a nice time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not really setting up like a birthday party or something.
No.
You never know. Those neighbors might just be pissed off about the parking. Be like, oh, like they're parking all over the damn place. Like,
But they're not parking where the no parking signs are.
I guess that's true. So it describes the town a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Not really much, but this is Jacob's Bell. And this house basically overlooks the whole town. So it's kind of, even though not necessarily a really big house, it's kind of it definitely catches attention.
Right. And it seems like the neighbors could possibly be angry because they mentioned like somewhere wanting to maybe like flatten the hill and drain the wetlands and expand the town. But like this house and this hill are like kind of in the way of that as like a possible reason for like antagonism within the community. But speaking of the size of the town, one of my random guesses is that Blake is like a musical or artsy person because he describes the town as a 2-theater town, which seemed like not the descriptor that I would think of. So like I live in Austin and I don't know how many theaters are in Austin. This is already a bad analogy, but I wouldn't describe Austin based on the amount of theaters it has. I know that that's a thing some people do. And it's a thing that Wildbow specifically does in Pale. Louise thinks about Kennet and how it only has one theater, but this is after thinking about like the specific population size and how many schools there are and like that sort of a thing.
That's fair.
It might not be that, but then he also says he doesn't want to get caught up in his family's tempo, which like no one says. maybe some people say it, but I was like, ooh, tempo, ooh, theater, ooh, there's paint on your pants, ooh, you have tattoos that are in the watercolor style. He's artsy.
That's true. I mean, just to go back to the theater reference for the town, FYI for everybody, me and Malia grew up on Maui. So when I did varsity soccer and we would go to Molokai to play and we would take the ferry over. And I know when I was describing like pretty much how small this island was, they have one theater, like one movie theater on the island. And of course it was on the opposite end of the island to where we were. So we couldn't go see any movies there. But I don't know if I'm necessarily super artsy. I like art. I'm just not very talented in it. But I'm like, if it's that small, I could see them,
Sure, but when I describe Molokai, I don't know if this has changed because it's been a while since we've been there, but I would say that it is a one-stoplight town or like a one-stop island. Last time we were there, the whole island had one stoplight.
I mean, I guess that's true. I used to just tell people in the middle of the night, like 10 o'clock at night, this is what we do for entertainment. Like, you'd go get bread. Okay, so
it's great bread.
It's not just at the bakery. You got to go down an alley and then another side alley, and it's like all covered with graffiti. You knock on this big wooden door. This big guy with like this little apron could come out and look really intimidating, and they had like seriously the best bread that you ever had.
Yeah, there was often a line.
Yeah, it was freaking delicious, and it was only like at 10 at night. I'm sure they had an actual bakery that you can go to during the day, but that's just not as fun. Anyway, I'm sorry. Back to the actual podcast stuff. Let me see here. So yeah, it is possible Blake could be a fantastic musical theater person. I guess we'll just have to see. Let me see here. Do you want to move on with... Mm-hmm. All right, so basically, after he gets done procrastinating and describing everything around him as best as possible, he goes inside. We get a good look at the surroundings inside the house and the first glimpse of his dysfunctional family. And oh boy. It's dysfunctional, all right.
Right. But before he goes upstairs, the one thing I wanted to point out was the litter box, right? So there is a clean litter box because the cat does not use the litter box because the cat is a familiar for the grandma and the cat does not need to poop in the box. I mean, like, I guess maybe the cat could still want to, but it seems like that's why it's super clean. Like, that's why it's pointed out that it's clean.
That's true. Kind of a weird thing I noticed while rereading this again, that I'm not going to say if it's important or not. It might be really important. It might not. There's a box of colorful cereal in the kitchen, which just, I don't know. I don't know if that seems like a Grandma Rose thing, but...
I feel like Grandma Rose may indulge sometimes, but I think it's a little bit more likely that like maybe the cat, when it's not in cat form, really likes cereal or something. Like maybe it could be for Grandma Rose, but like maybe not. / maybe it's maybe it's for one of her grandkids who they like brought it.
That probably makes more sense. But you never know. I mean, that could just be an unsolved mystery in the story. So we have quite a few of his family, basically, at this house. And they're all dressed in black. They're not acting very dignified, however. They're kind of like yelling and cursing at each other, which is great. You know, really calm, nice environment for a 1.5-year-old. But basically, they see Blake come up and they're kind of, I guess, shocked that he's there. He ends up going and talking to his parents, who he hasn't seen in, what was it, about 3 years?
Yeah, I think he left 3 years ago.
Don't bother giving him a hug or anything, but just being like, you're all right? You're not in trouble? And he's like, I mean, yeah, and I can't help but notice you got tattoos. Oh, thanks, Dad. Glad to see you're so concerned about my well-being.
Yeah, it was really sad. And it kind of took me a bit, because I'm not, we're just introduced to this story. It didn't really hit me emotionally as much the first time. The fact that, like, they don't go to him and they don't, freak out with excitement when they haven't seen or heard from their child in 3 years. Because I was like, I don't know who any of these people are either. Like, I don't know what's going on. But it's really awful and sad. And, like, I was thinking to myself, like, did they do enough? And, like, no. Like, to find Blake. I mean, like, they asked around. They talked to the police. But then that was it. And, like, thinking about, like, our parents, like, they'd be in the streets. Like, my mom would drive to, like, every person's house that she knew that I ever knew or whatever. Like, they would not be okay.
I spent the night at someone's house once in college without telling her about it, and she legitimately called all of my friends asking if I was alive. So, yeah, she would definitely be out there. Yeah, sorry, Mom, about that.
And it was just really sad because, like, he says, like, he would have gone back, So I'm kind of like, is this a cry for attention? Because it seems like his problem with his parents is that they don't care enough. And they weren't, like, I don't know if involved enough is the right term. Blake's also stubborn enough to, like, remain homeless and different things, which was hardcore, but it was really sad.
Yeah.
And I have in my notes that the lawyer found him, but the lawyer's a practitioner, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, we don't say anything about that. You're just assuming things.
He's
okay?
definitely a practitioner.
All right, well, we'll get there a little bit later as well. Let me see. So after he talks to his parents, he sees Callan, his cousin, whose first thing is just like, you're wearing paint-colored jeans? And why the hell did you come? We all thought you were, like, most of us thought you were dead or something. Just like, thanks.
Callan sucks.
Yeah, he kind of sucks. Anyway, so his good cousins seem to be Paige and Molly. So ends up seeing Paige first, and she tries to give him a hug, and he flinches pretty badly, and really took her aback.
Yeah. This was kind of a good character building moment for Blake, I thought, because it's like, oh, okay, he doesn't like to be touched, but also this has something that has changed in the past 3 years. It really makes me curious about his, like, backstory, his time living on the streets, and then also since, because he refers to, like, it was weird talking to someone who didn't know the story. And so I assume he's really, like, close and open with the people who are in his life now.
Mm-hmm.
But they were also there during whatever sort of trauma he experienced. And it was just really sad. And it was also like, oh, and then he tried, and it was, like, so awkward and horrible. But I hope Paige appreciated it, because I don't know. I really appreciated that he tried to have that connection with his cousin again. It was, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think she appreciated it. She seems to care about him quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He does kind of open up to her a bit, like a little bit, just kind of saying, like, yeah, I was on the streets for a bit. Wasn't really a fun time,
Yeah.
Kind of talks about how he bought his first motorbike by himself and all this stuff, so that's kind of cool. They have a little bit of small talk going, a little bit of opening up, which is really good. I feel like Blake needed that. Let me see. They do kind of talk about as well, like, some of the stories about the house, kind of how weird it is being there, and some of the old, like, rumors and things that they had heard.
Yeah, one point that I drew out of that conversation, as I think Molly's there by that point, was Paige says, I love arguing semantics. And she'd also already said, or Blake had already said, somebody had already said that she wanted to go to law school. And as a law student, that just made me, like, crack up, because she's going to love it. It's the perfect place for her.
Oh, and specifically that's talking about the duel. So there was a duel when one of our ancestors not married. They probably married someone too, since they were talking about how, like, their great-grandparents were hooking up. But no, the duel where one of our ancestors murdered someone, and then Paige said killed. I don't think it counts as murder if it's during a duel. And then that's where Molly's like, semantics. Yeah, so it seems like these three kind of have a good, like, rapport going on. Thank goodness that some people in this family can get along, because holy crap, it's ridiculous. And we kind of skipped Molly coming in, but she came in as well, just talking a little bit. And she does, interestingly, tell Paige, like, don't take the offer.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, right?
Right, because so Molly's younger, which means, based on the pattern that has been established, the older cousin's going into the room first, that Molly hasn't talked to Grandma Rose. So it seems like she doesn't know exactly what the offer... I mean, like, everyone knows it's the house, but she seems both to know more about the specifics and the particulars, but also that's really interesting because she hasn't been in the room yet. And she talks about how they've been living in the town. So she's probably had more exposure to Grandma Rose. It makes me wonder if she's at this point aware. Okay, cool. New prediction on the fly. Molly's aware, capital A.
Okay.
But I think that... Yeah, I mean, she helps build up the tension, and also, like, the tragedy of what happens to her is, like, further established in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Molly really ratchets up the tension with, like, everybody hates me, and, like, not me personally, but, like, us in this town. Like, everybody in this town, like, knows who we are and hates us, and, like, don't do it. But she doesn't say why, which is very frustrating. But it was a really interesting moment.
That was kind of interesting when she was talking about all that, like... About a third of the people around here have decided we're their mortal enemies. That's got to be more than parking, right? So, well, I thought it was funny. That's fine. All right. Anyway, so yeah, Paige and Peter go in and come out after, and basically Paige is just furious at Peter because she's accused him of making up lies to make it so that she wouldn't get the inheritance. Yeah, he was like, what, you thought I'd be on your side?
Right, which leads me to think that they didn't grow up together for some reason, why? I'm curious. But also it was really interesting to me that they go in at the same time, because, I mean, there's this big thing about birth order, and, like, they're twins, and, I mean, presumably one of them was born first, because if not, oh my god. But, like, there seems to be this, like, thing about it, but it also seems shitty that, like, everyone else gets a chance to defend themselves or something. But also the boys going in, it's like, you're not going to give it to them, so are you just asking them to rat on each other? In which case, why don't you have, like, the parents also involved? Like, it was just sort of weird and suspicious. So one of my theories is to, or I don't know if we should get into that now. My theory is to one of Grandma Rose's criteria for picking people.
Sure. I'm kind of curious.
Okay, yeah. So I think that her big thing... So Grandma Rose is a practitioner. I don't need to justify myself. Okay.
Okay. All right.
But so I think her thing is she's a practitioner and her house is a domain, right? And she wants to pass her house on to someone who can handle, right? She wants to make sure that the person who's going to inherit this house can deal with the practice, right?
Okay.
And so in the same way, sort of, that, like, Miss was like, okay, Kenneteers, like, go a whole weekend without lying. I think that Grandma is, like, probing her grandchildren to kind of see, like, who's being the most truthful. And so it seemed really important that Paige and Peter came out, and Peter says, like, I didn't say anything that wasn't true. But Paige was like, no, you made up lies to sink me. And it's like, okay, obviously one of them is lying in that moment.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wonder if Grandma was kind of like, Paige was lying, and so she can't handle, or something. Like, I'm kind of curious, because Blake also says that, like, Paige is, like, really similar to Grandma in a lot of ways, except that she's not horrible. So it seems like they would have an affinity, and she'd be like, oh, yes, like, an aspiring lawyer. Like, this is so great. Like, have everything. But something in that room presumably happened that had to do with the things that Peter was saying and the things that Paige was saying. I don't know if she was a lie detector or what, but that seemed really important.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's pretty interesting.
I think we're going to talk about Blake going in next, and I thought it was really interesting that Blake wasn't called, but he was summoned to the house.
Well, he cuts in, though, so maybe he would have been called, right?
Well, no. Well, I mean, no, right? Because, and I don't know why. I mean, maybe the lawyer just like didn't notice that he had arrived or something, or they just assumed that he wasn't going to be there. But it seemed kind of important upon like thinking about it for like the 8th time that Blake has to cut in because that's where he is in the birth order. And they're like, we're into that today or something. And so he has to assert himself. And I don't know if Grandma was just like, fuck him, or if like what, but that was weird.
Yeah, that's true. It could have been another test or something. I don't know.
Yes.
But yeah, so luckily Molly gives him permission to go first because they call for Molly, but she's like, yeah, you go ahead. And then Blake goes in and sees Grandma Rose. He's not exactly subtle when it comes to how he's feeling.
Right. Well, so I guess a final note about the Blake cutting in that it shows how much all the cousins care about each other because Blake doesn't just assert himself. He kind of does it like it seems like maybe to give Molly some time and some space and also Paige so that Molly can go and comfort Paige. It was like a really nice moment.
That's true. Like he's a good guy.
Yeah.
In the middle of all this terrible family stuff. But yeah, he basically goes in and, you know, Grandma looks pretty good in terms, she doesn't really look like she's about to die. Room smells like flowers and fresh air, like pretty much opposite of death. So doesn't really seem like she's about to kick the bucket. But, you know, she's propped up. She's got her nurse and she has her lawyer right there. And she has like a really big house cat that's just chilling. All right. What are your thoughts on this part, Malia? I feel like you really liked this part.
I really like this part. I want to start by saying that I understand that Grandma Rose is a bad person, but like, I love her. Like, I don't want to know her in real life. I think she's a horrible person. I don't want to like be around her, but also like, this is a woman who instead of having a welcome mat was like, no, I don't care if you're here. This is my house. This is my space. And I'm going to let you know that immediately because my initials are going to be monogrammed on this fucking doormat with roses, which is probably the smell he's smelling because her name is Rose and it's her house and she does not give a fuck. And I love it. She's obviously a practitioner, right? Because this whole conversation is riddled with her being very particular about words and being very probing as to Blake's truthfulness, his, I want to say veracity. I don't remember if that's the right word. Anyway, she doesn't look like she's about to die. Her death is like obviously maybe magical or something. But she also knows that she's about to die. Like there's some shenanigans with a curse or a time limit on the domain or something. But yeah, this part's so great because Blake is great. Every time I read the like things he says to her at the very beginning, it's very shocking. But also she's just kind of like, and like, I love it. And I love how he gets her to shed a little bit of her bullshit and be a little bit more real with him. I think she really likes that. Mm-hmm. I kind of think that maybe I don't see her talk with Molly, but I can see her like vibing with Blake a lot and maybe thinking like, okay, this kid, like maybe I should choose him, except I can't because I said it was going to be a girl and therefore that's happening. Oh, and there was a moment when I first read it where I thought Blake was trans because I thought Grandma was being a dick because she said something about like, oh, and I'm going to give it to a female grandchild. And I thought she was insinuating like, oh, Blake, you're trans. You're actually a girl. But he doesn't respond like, fuck you, Grandma, I'm a man, like, go away. He's just kind of like, okay, whatever. Like, and I was like, oh, okay, so I don't think he's trans.
Yeah, he probably would have. I mean, he started out with calling her, let me see, what is this? A disgusting, evil, rancid cunt, which...
That's a lot.
I mean, I know cunt's not that bad of a word in Australia, but at least, I mean, if it's anything what, like... the U.S., I'm assuming, in Canada, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad here, but yeah, so he probably wouldn't have held back with that.
No, Blake is not there to make friends.
No.
Blake is there to, like, give his cousin some time and to yell at his grandma.
Yes. But yeah, he definitely gives her a good chunk of his mind, which is great. And she's definitely using her words very carefully. Doesn't really care about the money part. It seems like she's like, oh, this ridiculous money business. What do you think about that she's not giving it to her kids? Like it's going to the grandkids.
Yeah, I don't have a super great guess necessarily. So I was thinking about this, right? Because in Pale, practitioner families, and they talk about it in like the about section for Pale or whatever, they tend to pass on the practice because repetition and expectations and things like that, especially in families, like always passing it down to your kids can really strengthen like their whole practice and their whole thing. But it seems like her three... I'm also a little unclear as to who exactly her children are. It seems like she did not introduce her children to the practice. And it makes me wonder, like, because it seems like she makes some comment about her father, and I'm kind of like, okay, your dad was a practitioner. She doesn't talk about her husband. And so maybe her husband wasn't a practitioner or something. She also has her own initials monogrammed, and so, like, I don't think she cared. But, like, so she's really into the whole female grandchild, and I'm thinking maybe... So I'm a law student, as we've mentioned, and in property that I took, like, a year and a half ago, we talked about different ways to, like, bequeath property. And so when you write something into your will, you can specify, like, really ridiculous things. And so something that they don't really have anymore, but that they used to have, is called a fee-tail male. Fee-tail being that it goes from person to person to person, like to your heirs in your line. And when there's no more heirs in your line, the property reverts back to like someone else. Sometimes like the original owner who granted it to you. Sometimes someone else they might specify. But so the people in that line don't have any control over to like who they give the property to. Oh, Jane Austen. There we go. In Pride and Prejudice, the girls, they can't inherit because the way that Mr. Bennet inherited the property was through this type of land bequeathal thing, which is a big plot point, right? Because they are of a high enough class where they can't, quote unquote, can't work to earn money. So one of the only ways to get money is by like owning land and property and stuff. So Mrs. Bennet is very, very concerned with marrying off her daughters because otherwise they're like gonna be poor because they are not going to inherit because it's inextricably a fee-tail male, which means it's going to the next male relative, which is Mr. Collins. Anyway.
Interesting.
So I was thinking that this domain is somehow a fee-tail female because I know from the Pale extra materials that domain can live on after people die. And so I was thinking that if her biological children are all boys, like maybe Aunt Irene married her son who's not around anymore, which is why Molly has the same last name as everybody else. And then it's Paul and then Blake's dad, right? If those are the three brothers,
okay,
then she has to give this house to a woman for some reason. Anyway, that was the legal corner.
All right.
News for the day.
That was a good one. That's pretty interesting. All right. So y'all learned some legal stuff today. Very cool. And so did I. That's definitely a good food for thought. I guess moving on from that, next thing I see in the note is that Blake couldn't accept a cup of tea because he was going to throw it at her.
Well, I was going to say, so this is part of my Grandma Rose is a practitioner theory. This is a theory in the way that like gravity is a theory, where it's like quote unquote a theory, but like it's fact, right? So like she's very particular about, well, like you already mentioned, right? Where she like doesn't, she's like, oh, they care about the money. That's so whatever, because like she has the practice, right? Like she cares about this thing that's so much more, like the house to her is so much more than like the money that can be gained from selling it. Mm-hmm. And I love this. This is, I didn't notice this till my second read through it. I was really excited. But the male nurse, who I think is like an other maybe, or a practitioner or something, he definitely knows what's going on. But he offers Blake tea. He's like, I can offer you a cup of tea if you promise not to throw it at her, which is really funny. But then Blake is also like, okay, don't give me tea then, because I'm going to fucking throw it at her, which is like evidence of Blake's like truthfulness and stuff. Like Blake wasn't going to make a promise and then break it immediately. And he was upfront about that and honest and like whatever. And I think Grandma really liked that and was paying attention to that because that means he maybe won't get forsworn as easily or something. Because he wasn't going to make a promise and then go back on it, which is very important for the practice. She also is very like obsessed with, she's like, are you accusing me of being a liar? Like Blake almost like fucking gainsays his grandma like on her death day or whatever. But then he doesn't. He kind of like thinks about it and it's kind of like, no, technically the thing that you said wasn't exactly a lie or something. I don't remember exactly how he says it, but it was like this like really funny moment because I was like, ha, you're gonna gainsay your grandma. She's great. Anyway,
I'm trying to remember which chapter this is, and I can't quite find it in my scrambled attempts to look, but I just thought I'd point out to you as well. In Pale, do you remember at all, like, I think they first kind of introduced it when they went to Edith and Matthew's house for that barbecue?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when they were kind of talking about how, like, offering something to eat and drink and stuff like that?
Oh.
Like, would you tie...
Kind of.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting in terms of, like, they offered him tea. I wonder if that kind of applies, or, like, do you have any thoughts, or am I just, like, making up crap? That's possible,
no,
too.
This is great. And I wish that I had reviewed that sooner. I'm making this, like, big notes page with all the Pale information, but I just started doing it. So I have to flesh that out. But this reminds me of when Charles talks about being forsworn, and the spirits really care about, like, hospitality, and, like, guest rights are, like, a really important, like, historical thing that is, like, passed down, because he was kind of like, oh, when, like, Alexander, like, or when he cut his foot or whatever because I pushed the table, like, that was, like, such a big deal because of, like, the guest rights and hospitality laden in with that.
Yeah.
And I feel like accepting food creates, like, this hospitality guest, like, compact where, like, I've accepted this thing from you and it needs to be, you need to not be poisoning me or whatever, but also, like, accepting the thing means that you have taken on certain, like, guest responsibilities, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it could just be tea, because the nurse could just be a nurse. It doesn't have to be another nurse. I mean, it could just be, like, tea, and then, like, well, I'm not gonna let you use it as a hot missile for my infirm grandma here.
Yeah, she's fine.
Okay. We also note that she's a lawyer. Woo!
I was so happy. This is so funny. And that plays into my whole, like, some of my, I mean, not really my theories, but just, like, actually it plays into a huge theory that's going to drop at the end of this podcast.
All right.
Moving on.
Yeah, we're trying to save some of the really big theories for the end, just to, you know.
No, I'm saving the one. Jenny does. I actually didn't put this in the notes.
All right.
I have a big, bold, specific prediction.
All right, I'm very excited to hear this. So, ends up leaving with a bang, essentially, and going and sitting outside, waiting until basically, I think it was like a quarter to midnight.
Something like that,
Something around there. And then everybody goes back inside. And then Grandma Rose comes out, basically is like, well, you guys are all a disappointment. And tells who gets the inheritance after all.
And it was just really great because then Blake was like, don't worry, the feeling is mutual. And everyone else was, like, shocked because they're all like, oh my God, the money. And it's kind of like, he's not going to get it because he's a boy. But it's also really funny.
Yeah. He doesn't care.
No.
So, drops the bomb. Poor Molly gets the inheritance. And she's like, I don't want it. And Grandma is like, well, you remain free to ignore it. And what does he say exactly? Basically, it'll get passed on to the next.
No, it's like, it's going to remain in, like, a trust or something until she's 25. And then she can, like, sell it or get rid of it or whatever at that point. But until she's 25, she can, like, live on it and do a bunch of stuff with it, but she can't sell it or something until she's 25.
That's right. She really doesn't want it, but everyone else is like, oh, I'll take it. Because they're a bunch of greedy people. But she ends up just making everybody get out. Interestingly, even though everyone looked super healthy, midnight exactly, Grandma and Cat die at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
I don't know if this is like a curse or what, because I haven't run into that too much in Pale. But there's a lot of talk about familiars and Snowdrop and, like, wanting to extend Snowdrop's life in Pale, right? So it's kind of like, oh, like Avery's big motivation. Right now she's, like, decided to make Snowdrop her familiar. That hasn't happened yet, but that's happening, is because she's like, oh, Snowdrop is a possum and they don't live very long. And I want Snowdrop to be around. So a big motivation is tying their lifespans together, kind of. So the cat died immediately because the cat's her familiar, right? I don't know why midnight, it seems very the practice and very dramatic. They're really into, like, the big entrances and the big exits. And it seems like at the stroke of midnight is, like, yep, very much a thing.
True.
But I don't know why. And I don't know why she knew about it. I don't get it. I think it has to do with the house. I'm really obsessed with the house.
Okay. All right.
Like everyone else in this family.
Yeah, everybody's obsessed with the house. And then, yeah, Blake reaches out and tells Molly.
But before...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
So the male nurse is another theory. I guess I should stop saying male nurse and just say nurse. But anyway. So then the nurse is another theory because Grandma gives the nurse some money. She's like, some of this money's going to you. You've been amazing. And he like freaks out. He's kind of like, it's not allowed, which was very much like brownie vibes to me, kind of, that like the brownies were going to eat him or whatever, because like he was doing a thing that wasn't allowed. But also like it felt like there was some sort of like deal or pact or whatever. And that giving money was somehow either imbalancing that or doing something like okay, sure, this could be the type of thing where like at Disney World, when you work certain positions, you're not supposed to accept tips, but it's the other verse. So it's magic.
All right. Whatever you say, that could be right. It could be, yeah. I mean, it might be right. That might be totally it.
But yeah, then Molly kicks them all out.
Yes.
Which was Molly in a way kind of like taking some ownership of the house, it seemed. Because Grandma was like, you can ignore this. But Molly's options were like to go home with like her family that's gonna, and like maybe Molly doesn't want the house because she doesn't want everyone to be like, give me money. But also there's something else, Yeah. Because it's the practice.
True.
She in like taking the authority and kicking everyone out and being like, yeah, like the lawyer will call the cops on you, like talk to my lawyer, I think took enough ownership of it that she was wrapped up enough in it. Or if she had just like gone home, some practitioner would have like found her and killed her and it would have just been like moving on. Blake wouldn't have had 4 nice months.
True.
In his house.
That's right. So, with that, Blake goes home for 4 months. Nothing happens. It's like the most peaceful part of his life, probably. Then he has a really unsettling dream, which is very interesting. So, take me through the dream, Malia.
Okay, so vision 1, right? It's a long table. One side is a bunch of blonde women and girls that are wearing like specific matching-ish colors. And then the other side is just like a bunch of people who I think looked like they're part of one family, but like were different ages, different genders, different whatever. And so they know that something has happened. They know there's a disturbance in the force. They kind of like mention Grandma Rose. I hope she would slip in her old age. She made other arrangements. So they know Molly's dead. They know things have changed. They know the domain has shifted hands. And they have thoughts about it. These seem to be some of Grandma's like enemies or whatever that the girl in the mirror references. I think she references them. Anyway, and they are in the midst in this vision of arranging a marriage between what I believe might be a coven.
Okay.
All the blonde women, because they're all women. And maybe they just make them all dye their hair. Yeah, anyway. And then this practitioner family seemed to be maybe some sort of arranged marriage or just 2 practitioner families. Vision number 2. What we have may or may not be 2 witch hunters or more awoken versions of witch hunters. I don't know if witch hunters can be awoken or if that's the right term, but they seem like they're out to like hunt down some shit because that's what they like doing. And like a metronome falls over and Blake is viewing like through the metronome. I don't know if I'm assuming like a magical metronome that like measures disturbances in the practice vibes.
I mean, they might like music. They might play an instrument,
That's true. The musical witch hunter.
That's probably
everyone's
not
musical. But so it's they get in a really funny Twilight dig about the sparkly vampires out west, and they also are kind of like anything that can knock the metronome over isn't human anymore or won't be for long. And it's like, wait, is Blake turning into an other? Like, I thought the story was about Blake turning into a practitioner. Like, oh fuck, like, don't know, unclear. But then it's also like maybe he isn't knocking it over. Like maybe in the last vision, Johannes is like manipulating things, or like he's seeing the scrying bull, which is Johannes jumping around seeing things. It was very unclear. Okay.
Who knows?
There's
Yeah.
No one knows.
Not me. I have no idea. I'm lying.
And then we got some Irish people in a snowy field that seemed to be some sort of like master apprentice relationship, because like I'll give you that one for free, like questions and answers have prices or whatever, who also are aware of this thing. Okay, they're Irish because their names are Maggie and Padraig. I can't pronounce anything. I'm very sorry. There's a girl pointing at a rabbit who might be her familiar or something, at least an other or something. I was thinking maybe Blake was viewing it through like a frozen pond because she like throws a rock and it shatters. Yeah, and she seems aware that she's being watched, probably knows about the disturbance in the force. Then there's a weathered Aboriginal woman brushing a young girl's hair, and then she shackles the girl. It gives me really strong like Tangled vibes, like she's like sucking the life force out of this girl.
Okay.
Which was really spooky.
Yeah.
She also seems to know that she's being watched and dismisses the whatever. And then finally, the last one that's described is a man on a throne at the top of a tower with his dog, who is also his familiar, in part because it speaks. And it notices Blake first. There's an important note about the scene of Jacob's Bell, I believe, being lit up in crimson sunset. Either that or like, I should have paid more attention. And the other scenes had been at night. I don't remember if it's Jacob's Bell that's in sunset or the guy in the tower that's in sunset or both. But that seemed important. I don't know if it's like we're seeing into the future or we're seeing into the past or we're seeing people on the East Coast and we're on the West Coast, which doesn't fit in with my later theory.
So I can read you the little excerpt if you want. So it says, so below him the small village sprawled, Jacob's Bell, except things were different, a twisted reflection of the buildings with embellishments and decorations, arches, steepled roofs, pointed roofs that curled and bent in zigzags, all lit up in crimson sunset. The other scenes had been at night.
Okay. Which kind of makes it sound like he had been viewing things through that scrying pool thing because Johannes seems to know some of what Blake saw. He says, resist the urge to dismiss what you just saw. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of like, okay, like, what were the other people experiencing? Were they experiencing Blake or were they experiencing Johannes or were they experiencing both? Was Blake sucked into some other realm and like bouncing around things? I don't know. But also Johannes' sketch, I don't trust him. Don't trust what they're saying about me. Like, okay, I don't know what they're saying about you, but okay. Jenny says, I should let you say it.
Wait, what do I say?
You push back on my distrust of Johannes.
I mean, I just feel like, he might be totally a good guy. He might be a great guy. Like, I'm trying to remember what I said exactly. Okay, so for one, like, yeah, you do have to think, like, it does seem to be good advice to resist the urge to dismiss what he saw, right? Like, that does seem like pretty solid advice. I mean, he offers help for a price, which, who knows what that means, because he could carry your groceries for the price of, like, your firstborn child. He doesn't specify how even all that is. But he does say, like, you're in a bad enough situation, resist the urge to dismiss what you just saw, and do yourself a favor and wake up. Which, that all seemed like pretty good advice. Because I feel like, without, it's kind of hard to give my opinion on that without, going one way or another on that. But just that part seems like probably good advice.
It does seem like he's being relatively straightforward with him. And I do think that the don't dismiss this and hey, wake up now are both good pieces of advice.
Yeah.
That was the dream.
Yeah, definitely spooky. So basically, wakes up, feels like real crap. Ends up going into the bathroom, probably gonna splash some water on his face and, like, look in the mirror. He looks in the mirror and he sees a girl in the reflection. She warns him to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, and she also delivers really sad news because I was already emotionally invested that Molly is dead, which was very sad.
Yeah.
And that Blake is next.
Yes.
Which is adrenaline inducing.
I've got to say, like, this part is probably, like, one of my favorites in terms of, like, most cliffhangery section. Like, oh my gosh. Like, I love it.
It's a great way to build tension. It's a great, way to, like, propel you into the story. I'm sad about Molly. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? But it's also, like, he says she looks familiar, which doesn't really help because, like, we don't know anyone in the story, but that was a thing, I guess. But that was interesting. Also, like, the mirror, right? Like, she breaks the mirror, and I'm kind of like, okay, is this like a Percy Jackson situation where, like, you can communicate through iris message, which is when you talk to people in, like, the mist of a fountain with a rainbow, where it's just like it's like Zoom, right, where you can like see each other? Or is this like this woman is like in another dimension, like in the mirror world, like Alice in Wonderland type shit? Like I don't know, but
I don't know.
Those are.
I feel like I need to read Percy Jackson again.
I don't know why that was the first thing to come to mind. Y'all are going to learn all the other book series I like by the end of this, I'm sure. Just
that's
by my
fine.
references.
That's always good. More books are better.
And like Molly left the house and I'm like, why the fuck did you leave? Because it seems like she was tricked out or scared out or something. But like if the house is a domain, like, okay, so the house is a domain, right? Because like Molly left equals Molly died. I mean, I guess she doesn't, like the girl doesn't explicitly say the house, but like I'm assuming that like the safe space or whatever she was mentioning was like the house, right? Because like it's a domain. Well, I'm assuming.
It says, so she said the house is Sanctuary Blake. Molly died because she panicked and she left the safe ground.
Right.
So,
and I think that's a big part. That is like probably the best evidence for my theory that the house is a domain, right? Because domains can protect you and you can control who gets in and who gets out and like all of this stuff. And maybe Molly wasn't like fully awoken yet. She didn't understand like the power of a domain. And I mean, domains can be penetrated. But I think that like that line is my strongest evidence for the house is a domain.
Okay. All right. So are we ready to get to your bold and specific prediction? Because I'm pretty curious.
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. I'm curious.
Okay. So my bold and specific prediction is about the type of practitioner that Grandma Rose is. And I believe that Grandma Rose is a karmic law practitioner.
Okay.
And then I stare deeply into Jenny's eyes to see if
All right.
she gives
A karmic
anything
law
away.
practitioner. Okay. Talk about how you've come to this conclusion.
Okay. I don't know what a karmic law practitioner is.
It's a good start.
So I was trying to bolster my claim about the house being a domain. So I went and I read the domain text in the Pale extra materials and I took notes, right? Okay. So the thing I didn't expect was the domain extra materials for Pale was actually provided a lot more information about different types of practitioners. And I was going through and they're talking about all these schools, right? And so you get to the quote unquote schools of security.
Okay.
And one of the ones, the very last one he mentions as a throwaway line at the very end of this thing is the karmic law practices, right? What have we established so far? We've established that the grandma is a lawyer, and this is the karmic law practice. So obviously, check, right? We've also established that everybody in this village fucking hates these people, right? Which seems like it could have something to do with karma.
Okay.
Point 2, right?
Yeah.
Point 3, this is a school of security, okay? And in the textbook, it said that the schools of security and the schools of realm are the two like most connected to and most involved with like domains in general.
Okay.
The schools of security was like the one where they talked about the woman who was a politician for this town and the economic despair or whatever spirit was going to come and like wreck everything. And she and her family had erected like a line of domains to like stave off this force.
Yeah.
Which is my source for domains can't exist after you die. So the whole thing with the schools of security is like warding off harm. And so again, don't know what a karmic law practice is, but I have a note about, okay. Yeah. Just, it's a really big, domains are a really big deal for the schools of realms and security, for security, particularly because they are like fortresses, right?
Yeah.
It's all the walls, the big ugly walls and the no parking signs because you can't let people up on your shit, right? So like the domain, right? You got to protect it and you got to claim it. You got to claim the area. And if people can park in front of your domain, that lessens your claim, right?
That's right.
And then also Molly leaving, right? The domain because it's such a safe place because we're all security people, right? And then the other thing that I've thought about is in that textbook, they talk about like the claim and like how when you claim an area as yours, as your domain, it's really like hard and scary. And that domains are like the most difficult of the 3 major Western rituals because when you declare like, this is my space, everybody's like, cool, I'm going to try challenge that, lol. Like there was a guy in the textbook who claims a space specifically to try to like attract this one other that he was hunting or whatever. So I think that dream was the domain is officially Blake's, right? The disturbance in the force, but also the like, hey, everybody, like Blake has claimed this thing now. Go fucking fight him. Because this is a fee-tail domain situation. And Blake has to get there for the security and stuff.
All right.
And those are all my really brilliant
I like it.
Specific predictions.
That's great. Okay. Well, we will see. We'll fortunately find out relatively soon if you're right or not about what kind of practitioner. So are you hoping that like Blake is going to follow her footsteps and just like have like a family of lawyers?
I don't think Blake would do very well as a lawyer. I mean, his like rhetorical skills seem pretty solid, but I think he'd find a lot of the bullshit and a lot of the like structural pettiness of the law to be very frustrating. And I know a lot of people who similarly are very frustrated with the law who are in law school.
Yeah.
And want to like dismantle things. So maybe, but I don't see him liking it. But I don't know. I'm curious as to whether he has a choice.
That's a question. That's a good question.
Because like practitioner family and this domain and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see.
He also could be turning into another. What if he turns into the domain? Ooh.
That's the whole secret.
When you bring objects into a domain, they become incorporated into part of the domain and they're harder to take out. So maybe like Grandma had to die because she had to like use her life force to like strengthen the domain. That's probably not it. That's not yeah. Okay.
You're not listing that as a bold prediction on your part. You're just.
It's a specific prediction, but it is not a bold prediction.
Okay. All right. Well, that was a pretty interesting discussion, I feel like. So I look forward to continuing on and keep reading and see what you think. We do have a discussion question. We're going to try to come up with these as often as possible. Might not be every week, but we'll try to incorporate it. Is we do want to try to compare Pale and... I guess before we get to the discussion question, like, just because our podcast is all about Pale and comparison. So I guess, what are your thoughts about this first chapter compared to, I guess, the first chapter of Pale that I read out loud to you?
Right. So that's really interesting because so you read me the prologue, right?
Yes.
And this doesn't have a prologue. It jumps right into the action. You know who the protagonist is. You know what's happening.
Yes.
They're both about smallish towns. I don't actually know if this is set in Canada, but they might both be set in Canada, which is kind of neat. They are both confusing.
That's fair.
Because one thing is like, this would be completely incomprehensible if I hadn't read Pale. Because I'm able to be like, this is the practice, and this is the domain, and this is whatever.
Yeah.
Because I know what all those things are. And if they were just like, here you go, like, go. Like, I would have been like, oh, the male nurse can't take tips. And like, oh, grandma's mean. And like, I would have realized there was some.
That's
something.
kind of interesting. I mean, I see what you mean, but like, okay, comparing those first two though, like, which one seems more incomprehensible? Because for me.
Oh, no. Yeah. The prologue is. That's what I was going to say. The prologue was like super bizarre.
Yes.
The moon was bleeding. Her eyes are bleeding.
Yeah, no, it was definitely pretty bizarre. Yeah, I feel like, when I read Pact, the first chapter made sense, and I was just more like, what the heck is happening? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And Pale, yeah, it was definitely a lot of what the heck is happening, because all I knew is like, it's the same universe as Pact, and so I was like, oh, well, this is supposed to be lighter. Like, there's the moon's bleeding. Ugh.
Yeah. He really goes hard in the first like arc of Pale, and then he's like, let's draw it back a little.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed them both quite a bit.
I think that because Pale is set up as a murder mystery, I was like more prepared for it to not make sense, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like, I was kind of like, okay, cool, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff I don't understand. And I mean, like, now if I was reading Pale, like, if I had done what a lot of people did and read Pact and then Pale, I would have been like, oh, cool, these are others, and oh, cool, those are practitioners. But I would have been like, why is the moon bleeding?
Yeah.
What is going on? And so I think that going from Pact to Pale, Pale's prologue is going to be more confusing than going from Pale to Pact.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm kind of interested to see how, as the story goes on, what you think of it. All right, now to our discussion question. So, and we were going to be posting this on a Reddit thread, so you can either comment on that thread or send us an email if you want to give us a response, what your thoughts are to this. But how would you compare your first impression of Blake's family with your first impression of the Pale protagonist families?
And if you want to pick one and highlight, say, like Verona's family or something, if it feels a little too ambitious, you can. But if you also want to do all of them, like,
go for it. Yeah, more the merrier. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of an interesting comparison. So I'll be looking forward to any answers that we get.
Just please no spoilers for Pact in your episodes. Hopefully Jenny will be the one that's reading them.
Yes,
and filtering them out. But I would love to read your answers too. And so try not to spoil things
them
for me, please.
Yeah, or at least cover those spoilers up, if anything, and I can share the unspoiler bits. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a rating and review.
You can follow us on Twitter at Pale Comparison, or send us an email at paleincomparisonpod@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for our Reddit thread where you can share your thoughts about our discussion question and let us know what you think about the podcast. Also, consider contributing to Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow.
Random fact. Chicken and ostriches are the closest living relatives of the T-Rex. Have a good one.
Bye.